Here we go. Cool. Okay, everyone can hear me? Perfect. Cool. Well, welcome. I am, so my name's Alex O'Brien. I've been practicing permaculture for about 5 years now, and I've been teaching and consulting for the last two. Um, I'm going to ask you to please be a little bit patient. I'm not used to teaching on Zoom. I'm used to teaching with people in the real, and this is kind of like a transition-y thing for me. So a little bit of patience would be awesome. Also, don't worry about writing down anything that's on the slides in front of you because I've given Gary a PDF that he's going to be able to pass on to you that has all this information already. So let's see if we can get this started. Perfect. So I'm sure I'm speaking for all the presenters this evening when I say welcome to your learning space. We want to denote this as a learning space. It's separate from the real world. We can all suspend disbelief for just a minute and we can really sit into the ideas and get some really new feedback just by acknowledging that this is not the real world. This is a learning space. So I like to start off with this quote, without the calf, there is no milk, right? So this is from Rumi, who's a poet, Sufi poet from the early 13th century. And the connotation here is, I love to teach. So thank you for being students so that I can be a teacher. Learning is behavior change. So if we're not changing our behavior, we're not learning. That's a really, really important point to just kind of drill home right off the start as well. And one more quick thing. If you learn something interesting, go teach it to somebody immediately. I've used this so much and it's such a powerful tool because it like ingrains something in a way that it doesn't get ingrained any other way. Because you've got like problem solving and memory retention happening at the same time and it just kind of drills it in there. So if you find something interesting, go teach someone. Okay, what is permaculture? Permaculture is a really, really appropriated word at the moment. And a lot of people think that it's just agriculture. It's just a way of growing things. But realistically, it is a design system that is inspired by natural systems. So basically, it is a design system. It is not one system. It's not about agriculture. It's not about social systems. It's not about the best way to design large cars. It's literally about the best design system that's inspired by natural systems. So we're looking to nature for her tools, her patterns, her cycles, because she's much better at this than us. She's been at it for a very, very long time, and there is no waste in natural systems. So it's important to take that into account. She is the most effective teacher. We just need to sit back and listen a bit more. Permanent culture is the breakdown of the word, essentially. So it was coined by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren in the early 1990s. And culture is the ideas, social behaviors, and customs that come with people. And we're trying to create a permanent place for those things to be, right? Pretty simple idea. A great quote from Bill Mollison is that it's a wardrobe in which we can hang all of human knowledge. So like there is nothing that permaculture doesn't apply to, not just agriculture. I want to get that straight out there. So we work inside a group of ethics. There are permaculture principles as well, and there's 12 of them, but we won't deal with them today. Let's just deal with the 3 permaculture ethics. So on the top of this Venn diagram here, we have a green circle, and that's representing earth care. So earth care is the provision for all the living systems to thrive and multiply. These are things that we are going to take on board when we design, right? So the next one is people care. That's represented by the red circle. And this is the provision for humans to access all the resources that we need for our abundance, right? It's not about being selfish. It's about putting yourself into the equation. We can't assume that we're going to live on fresh air, just fresh air. And the last one is fair share. So fair share comes at us from 2 directions. Fair share is about making sure that everything in the system gets an equal share of the surplus, but also reinvesting any surplus in the provision of permaculture ethic 1 and 2, using our reinvestment to further reinforce our systems. All right, I am a little bit strapped for time, so I'm going to try and fly through these things. I would normally be stopping and asking for questions, but I don't think it's really feasible in this particular environment. I'm sorry if it's a little bit quick. So the next page is catching and storing energy. I'm going to take two different ideas and just kind of mesh them side by side so that we can clearly see what we're talking about. So in common agricultural practice, we are concentrating on one yield, one product. We're turning out dairy, we're turning out wheat, we're turning out one thing. So the diagram for that looks very, very simple. On the left-hand side here, we have a sun, the representative of the source, right? The circle is representative of our system. And then we have the arrow representing our element, right? So our wheat, our cows, whatever, is going into the system. And then at the bottom, we have the sink. So that little circle with the cross through it means that we have lost the energy. The energy has gone out of our system. So as we flow energy through our system, we want to make sure that we catch and store as much of it as possible. I think it's pretty obvious from the diagram that that is not happening inside of a monoculture system. So in permaculture, what we like to do is called polyculture. So we have lots of different things happening at once, or happening together, or supporting each other, right? So our diagram looks a bit more like this, right? It's a bit chaotic, it's a bit all over the place, but if we look at it from an objective point of view, on the left-hand side, if we take out our one element, we've lost our system. There's nothing happening. But we can lose up to 9 elements from the right-hand side, and we are still in business. We still have one thing going, we still have 2 things going. This creates resilience, which is incredibly important. It means that we can deal with unexpected occurrences. We can lose a crop, we can lose an animal. You know, these things are provisioned for because we have resilience. We also get multiple yields from a permaculture system, which is very different. So we get yields at different times of the year. We might get fruit at the start, fruit at the end. We might get big crops in the middle. We might get big crops at the start. There's a lot of different things time-spaced together. So what happens is we ended up with a much more overall bigger profit. And also the system is like self-supporting. It replicates itself. You know, it kind of takes care of itself in more of a way that we can step away and be busy doing our thing while the system is doing its thing. Nature takes care of herself as long as we listen to what she's talking about. So we're just going to take a different way of thinking, right? I'm going to, for example, take the way that we grow a crop, right? And I'm going to go on the assumption that we have the very best intention. We want to turn out the best crop. We want to be the most amazing farmer and really, really deliver on a very, very good crop. But we're going to use synthetic chemicals on the left-hand side, and we're going to use permaculture on the right-hand side, and that'll pop up when we're ready. So starting off with synthetic chemicals, we're going to fertilize our soil, right? Everyone knows what fertilizer is. We're probably going to be dealing with an NPK fertilizer, which means that it's basically a mixture of 3 chemicals. It's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And what happens is those are dissolved in a salt that therefore it goes into the water, and plants have to drink. They don't have any choice. So whatever you put in their water, they're drinking it. Now, when we fertilize plants, we make them flush. They blush, basically. They get big and green and chunky, and they look really good to pests, right? And we still have the best intentions in mind, but we cannot have pests attacking our plants. So, I mean, there's a flat out, we have to put a pesticide down. We don't have any choice. We've put down the fertilizer first, now we're going to put down the pesticide. And when we do, we wipe out the pests that may have taken care of other invaders. I'm not going to call them weeds, we'll just call them invaders for a moment. And those invaders are looking to take our nutrients that we've put in place for our single plant, our yield, right? So we have to eradicate them because they're going to take away from our profit, our yield. So we use a herbicide. And by using a herbicide in conjunction with a pesticide, we've essentially stripped all nature out of that system apart from that one plant, the one thing we want, right? And because we've got a big field of oneness, the next step is obviously disease. So we end up putting on a fungicide or something similar to kill off some pest that's smaller than pests that we understand. So we've got something coming into our system that's going to destroy our one crop. And we have the best intentions. We wanted to create the most awesome plant. And instead, what has happened is we've ended up with the whole biocide cocktail. And that's just a step by step. And this happens to every farmer everywhere. Because this is what we're fed. This is what we're told is the right way to do things. So if we go at it from a permaculture standpoint, we're looking for what does nature do? Well, nature starts off with living soil. So it's not about fertilizing the soil. The soil is already fertile. And this is actually, it comes back to a couple of different techniques, but one of them is no dig. So like, we're not turning this soil. This soil gets put down once and we avoid walking on it. We avoid anything that's going to compress it because we're looking for it to get crumb structure. Now, if anyone's walked into a field and they've been they get their hand and they rub it, they have a smell off the soil, they look at it, they want to see things. But I don't think I really understood what I was looking for a long time. I know now that what I was looking for is like a kind of a sweet smell and a crumb structure. So like there's little crumbs, there's little crumbly bits inside the soil that seem to just like sit on top of each other. And what happens is that allows the soil to breathe. That allows space for air to percolate through the soil. So by doing these two things, we've made room for micro and macro fauna. So the teeny teenies and the slightly bigger teenies. We want things like worms as well as protozoas, for example, right? These things all need to live together in our soil to make it so that we don't need a fertilizer, right? We still get pests. Pests still happen. But if we're going at it the way that nature tackles it, we want to create a mosaic of smells and colors. We want to make our plants that we take care of, that we want them to be camouflaged by a load of different things that smell really good and are really bright and colorful, so that our pests come into the garden, they're like, oh, where's the I'm looking for your thyme. I'm looking for your kale. Where's the kale? All I could see is bright cauliflowers and big explosions of smell, right? And by doing this, we've created a space where they are easily predated on. So we're going to create a predator habitat. We're going to put it into place where our frogs can live. We're going to put it in a place where our birds can live and be like a little bit stealthy about where they are, so they can kind of catch those very easily distracted or very easily predated pests, because they're distracted. They're standing there going, what the hell is going on? That's exactly when they get caught. And this is exactly how nature does it. And the last one is guilds. So like permaculture talks a lot about guilds in social structures, in animal systems, and in plant systems. And it's just the idea of things that work together. Like these things rely on each other, they support each other, they're buddies, right? Everyone likes to have buddies. And one of the greatest of these is the Three Sisters, which is a Native American guild. And it involves 3 plants, all of which produce something that we can eat. There's corn, beans, and squash. So they all support each other, and this is how it breaks down, right? The corn grows tall and becomes the scaffolding for the beans, because the beans need a scaffolding to climb up. The beans fertilize the soil by a root associate. So they're fertilizing the soil, and then the squash ground covers. So it just covers all the space around it so that nothing else can grow. And in that way, they all support each other, they all grow well together, and we get 3 crops together for the price of 1. Basically, the space of the squash is the only space that we're using up. Right, different ways of analyzing resources. So for this one, I'm going to take a chicken, right? And when we analyze a resource, we want to analyze 2 aspects. What does it need? and what does it output, right? So our needs, and bear in mind, we want to put all the needs of the chicken really close to the chicken. We don't want to be carrying water half a mile to our chickens. We want to have a water tap right there so that we give water to the chickens right there. So obvious needs that they have are air, food and water, warmth and shelter, and other chickens. And we want all these things to be contained in the chicken's area so that we don't have to provide them in the way that we have to carry or do work. Now, they produce things. I'm only going to go through four, but chickens produce a lot of things. Some of these things are not that great, but some of them are fantastic. Like, for example, we have eggs. That's a great output. Manure. The manure from chickens is amazing for land. It's very, very potent, very high value. They give feathers, which we can use for pillows, or we can put into our compost. It's a good source of nitrogen for compost. Uh, yeah, nitrogen. And they do work, right? Not a lot of people think of it this way, but chickens scratch and they love to pick on pests, and they'll take up all the seed from the leftovers from the last crop, or if you're sending in compost, you're not getting any invaders. If you've got some chickens going through your compost, they will find everything. One quick point that I have to make is that any resource can become a pollutant if not properly used. So let's look at any one of those resources that we just talked about, right? If we're not using our manure correctly, that is a pollutant, right? It's gonna mount up and it's gonna smell. If we don't use eggs, now most people will always find a use for eggs, but in this particular instance, if we don't use the eggs, they go off and they will smell and they will be a nasty thing to have around as well, right? So any resource can become a pollutant if it's not properly used. So different ways of planning. I want to say this like as clearly as I possibly can. Nature doesn't grow in straight lines. The only straight lines in nature come from destruction and erosion. And that's part of nature too. But nature doesn't grow in straight lines. So all the patterns that I'm going to talk about right here are all based on growth, right? So nature applies three fundamental designs. We've got the honeycomb. Now the honeycomb represents the most efficient way to break down space with the least amount of wall. That's why bees use it. Bees are super, super efficient. She also uses branching. So branching is what you see in rivers, especially when they come down to their deltas, in trees, in roots, in our lungs. If you got to make something really big into loads of little things, branching, the only way to do it. And spirals, I love spirals. So this is a Fibonacci spiral, obviously, and it comes out of the inside of a shell. And we see spirals in shells and in flower heads and like a million other places in nature that I can't think of right at this minute. But spirals are fantastic. And if we apply these three design fundamental templates, we're going to find it so much easier to design because we're not thinking about the biggest rectangle that we can make. We're thinking about how many honeycomb bits we can get into that weird looking spot in the corner, right? A great application of these patterns is the herb spiral. I'm not sure how many people have heard about this, but this is one of those fundamental elements of any permaculture system, realistically. So it's 2 meters across and it's 1 meter high. And there is 9 meters of running herb bed with 4 separate ecosystems. It's fed by one sprinkler and it is single reach. So from anywhere around it, you can reach all the way from top to bottom. So you never have to stand on it. This is design application that is miles beyond me. I didn't come up with this. This is from my teachers. You can see here at the diagram is a little bit like, it's a little bit small. I prefer to have it a bit bigger, but you can see that there's actually a little frog pond at the bottom of most of the systems, and that's to create predator habitat. So it has all the elements that it needs for all these things to survive. And you get to plant mint without worrying about mint taking over your whole garden, because it just sits in its little ecosystem. As it gets up the spiral, it gets drier. And on our southern side, we've got a warmer side, and on our northern side, we have a cooler side. So it's got all this different ecosystems built into it. Fascinating. Right, I want to just give you some quick food for thought because I know that I'm running close on time. So we break things down in permaculture into zones. And zones for our personal property is about how many visits per year you're going to be doing to an element. And then you can place it accordingly, right? So if we have chickens, we're going to be visiting them twice a day, probably. They want to be close to your house. You know, we're walking a half mile every time you need to go see your chickens. But something like an orchard's probably 2 or 3 visits a year. That can be 3/4 of a mile, half a mile down the road. We don't have to worry about that being too far away. So that goes into a zone 4, whereas the chickens would go into a zone 1, which is very close to the house. In our community, we break down the zones by distance. So the distance we'd walk, or the distance we'd take a long walk, then the distance we'd cycle, and the distance we'd drive. Very simple way to break down community, right? Sectors. So this is another way to place items. So in sectors, we're talking about I want it or I don't want that. So let's talk about the sun really quickly. Where where does the sun come up and go down in your property? Where does it get sheltered at certain parts of the day by another building or a mountain? Or where is the sun where is the sun most commonly hot? For example, like the dragon sun, where are you getting your 4 p.m. sun? And you can place items based on that, like things that need the heat. Um, this can be applied to the wind, fire, smell, noise, and view. Like it's very much an I want that. Like I wanna hug that, bring that in, or I don't want that. Let's cage that out. Let's keep that away. Value the edge. So this is one of my favorite ideas. The edge is where all the diversity happens. So if we think of the edge of land meets water, in this area we have 2 ecosystems, but we actually have a third ecosystem just on the edge itself. So it becomes an incredibly biodiverse area. We've got the land, the bank, and the river, let's say, right? And this is where humans have always evolved and set up civilizations, literally because of this. It is so diverse and it provides an awful lot more because of the value, because of the edge. That edge between 2 things is where all the biodiversity happens. I want to talk really quickly about sustainable and regenerative. So these are 2 words which are used a lot. Sustainability has been kind of greenwashed, and I don't particularly like the word anyway, because it kind of implies like a bad relationship. So I like to talk about these things in relationship to our mother, to our mother nature, right? Would you prefer if your relationship to mother nature was described as sustainable or regenerative? And just with that in mind, whenever you think of the word sustainable, think, is it regenerative or is it just something that we can sustain? Right? Okay, so that was my presentation. That went down quick. If you learned something interesting, please go tell someone about it immediately. Immediately. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'll be available for the rest of the call, and I'll also be around directly after. One thing though, if you are contacting me about your personal property or your personal project, I'm doing free 45-minute consultations at the moment, because it's going to take me an awful lot longer to get to know your property than I have on this particular Zoom call. So if it is about your personal project or personal property, please contact me directly. I am doing free consultations right now. Thank you very much.